So it was actually quite.
Sorry, Liz.
All right. It was quite
Carry on.
interesting to go and work in a very, very different sort of organisation. I always think it's helpful to know where the organisation has come from in order to see where it's going. So as with all good charities or companies, it's had a long and varied history. So in 1986, Amber Valley Community Transport started, and that just served Ripley and the surroundings. And the chap on the right is my predecessor. That's Patrick Dawson. And there's a vehicles Sprinter in Ripley, and then the Crafter. Just a few years later, Chesterfield Community Transport started. In fact, it was Chesterfield and District Community Transport. These are buses, pictures of vehicles that have been provided by Tony Wilson, who used to drive for them in the early noughties. And as you can see, they like colourful vehicles, and these are all Varios. And then here's a couple more of their vehicles, again from that type of that period, and you can see that it was doing even at that time they were running a dial-a-ride service. Later, they adopted a more boring livery, I would suggest, of silver or grey, and unfortunately they're all old pictures that I've found in the archives. So as you can see, they were taken on particularly dull days, but that's that Vario that's been in one of the earlier pictures. And in 2010 they merged and they formed Community Transport for Town and County, which was known as CT40C. That's the logo they adopted. And really they merged for financial reasons. And yes, it's quite a challenge. The thing about running a charity is you've got to land on a sixpence, and I think that they were finding that that's still quite difficult separately. This then is some of the vehicles that were within that. They had a coach. The operating license was held by the charity, and then they had the good old stalwarts of the Sprinter vehicle that's being used again for a shopper bus. The coach was partly used for training and partly for trips, but I have to say it was underutilized, and it had gone well before I joined there. And then in 2017, Clown, which is to the northeast of Chesterfield, Clown Community Transport ceased trading. And so CT40C took over much of their work and provided all the services in that area. And indeed, we still do that today. So although with technically the merger of two, we actually also have the Clown Community Transport workers there. And I have to persuade them not to stop here wearing the uniform, because they're very fond of their sweatshirts, even though they went out of operation quite some time ago. In 2018, then, a year later, again, there was some financial challenges, and CT40C merged with HCT and changed its registered name and registered the name Derbyshire Community Transport. So it was only at that point that it was called Derbyshire Community Transport as opposed to the regional names. And they had a big splash of a launch day, and you can see that the pictures of the vehicles there with a new livery that was used throughout HCT at the time. And you'd have seen that running in Bristol and not on the Channel Islands, but in Bristol and in Yorkshire at the time. And you can see the new logo that was like the HCT logos is just an adaptation of that with the yellow with the white swoosh on board. And that is I was trying to think of the name of the castle. I can't remember the name of the castle. It's a hotel that's actually now closed, where they had the launch just near Matlock. So those are those vehicles. And the most recent thing that happened is that we are actually demerged in 2020. So I joined in late 2019. And in that point, it was clear that there were some financial difficulties, and HCT wanted to close us and we said, you're not going to close us, we're going to keep going. And so we demerged, lots of negotiations, lots of getting out of contracts and changing things, but we managed to avoid that and come out at the other side. But rather frustratingly, so we demerged 24th of January 2020 with a 3-month plan to get us back on track from that point. And then of course COVID happened. Best laid plans of mice and men meant that we then had a whole new set of circumstances to cope with, to handle, as indeed everybody else in the country did. But just when you think you're getting back on the straight and narrow, then things change. When I first joined, there were 55 vehicles, and indeed during that process we actually reduced it down to 24 vehicles in order to get financial viability and sustainability in place. Now, unlike this is where some of the differences, more of the differences start. So unlike a business where you want to make money and be sustainable, as a charity, we have a vision, and we have something that's called our objectives, our objects. So our objects are that no one, regardless of age, ability, disability, or financial status, or the domestic location, should be prevented from enjoying a full life because of lack of access to private or public transport. Our objects say that we will deliver our aims within Derbyshire and the surrounding counties. So that means that if we need to slip into Nottinghamshire, then that's fine. And indeed, we do regular shopping trips across the border into Mansfield. So that's something I know companies have a vision, but having objectives like that, we regularly have to review what we're doing against our charitable aims. That's an active process. It's not just a sort of passive process. So that's the first thing that's sort of really different. When we're talking about community transport, I would have to stress that it is a specialist transport. I think that in the past, and indeed some community transport, it's just, well, we've got a bunch of volunteers in a bus, and perhaps that it's sort of it doesn't seek the recognition it deserves because it is specialist form. You do need to have a lot of knowledge of your service users. One of the things that I quite often say that, if you're a train driver, you don't know who's on your train. You've just got a bunch of people that have got on with tickets, so you won't see them unless you see them wandering up and down the platform. If you're a bus driver, then you will see everybody as they get on, probably. And they might say goodbye and thank you. Indeed, we understand that's a very common thing. Whereas if you're a community bus driver, you know where the person lives, you probably know their carers, their relatives, you know what their physical needs will be, you probably know what they're going to be having for supper, and you are just involved at a completely different level in their lives, with their day-to-day lives. We regularly get stories about how our drivers are making a difference, and and also our passenger assistants, just in a way that I think, my knowledge of bus drivers, you don't get that. You don't get people knitting your blankets because they think you're looking a bit cold if you're driving the 192 in Manchester, but you do if you're driving the Derbyshire Community Transport, Derbyshire Connect. Our vehicles then can be configured flexibly, and I'll show you some more sort of implications of that. So all the seats can be taken out, they can be stored, and so if you've got 2 wheelchairs, you can carry 2 wheelchairs. If you've got 4 wheelchairs, you can carry 4 wheelchairs. But that's a regular feature. The typical bus driver doesn't go in and out, taking his seats in and out. And our services are very much shaped by the needs of the local community. It's, of course, in the bus industry, that is the case as well. But because we're smaller, we can react to smaller volumes and serve those needs. And I think it's just that is a matter of scale. So here's where we are. I don't know if everybody probably knows the way around Derbyshire, but just in case you didn't, there's where Chesterfield and Ripley are. So well, we largely serve the eastern side, and so you can see Clown there in the far east of Derbyshire. We have had a base in Glossop, but we closed that fairly shortly after I arrived. So we probably go down, we do go serve Long Eaton with some of our services, Ilkeston, Heanor, and then Eckington, Killamarsh to the north. So it's that side. Belper we go to, a little bit to Wirksworth and Duffield. So, but there is another community transport based in Belper, based in Bakewell, and also one based in Ashbourne. Right, this is the next thing is about how we operate, and because we're not actually just the charity, we also have a trading company. And this I think is important as to how getting this right allows us to do more things. Now there was changing guidance in 2019 about there's changing guidance in 2020 about how community transports, whether or not they could hold an operating license, because up to that point Derbyshire, well, CT40C as it was, had an operating license even though it was a charity, and therefore you have this question about things being for hire and reward. It's one of the things that I've changed fairly early on. So we're a registered charity. We're also a company limited by guarantee. We operate on Section 19 permits, which means that we mustn't run anything with a view to a profit. We can do full cost recovery, but we have to demonstrate to anybody who wants to look at any time that we're not planning to make a profit on things. So that means that we have to land on a sixpence if we're getting things really right. Obviously, you need to invest in vehicles, you need to be able to pay for your profit, your property, etc. But getting that right and within the objects is the art. Because we run on Section 19 permits only, all our users must be registered with us, and through that process they demonstrate why they can't meet their needs by normal transport modes. And as I said, transporting them must meet our charitable objectives as well. Now those are quite wide, as you've seen earlier on in our vision, but we do just need to sort of think about that a little bit carefully, and that's particularly if we're taking small numbers, and whether it is perhaps going out to do a social thing, is that something that is charitable, or is that something that really ought to be regarded as a commercial activity? We don't have any Section 22 permits, which would allow us to run a community bus, just because we're waiting for them to come. I applied in May. I'm just waiting for them to happen. I've heard horror stories of people waiting a year for the Section 22 permits to come through. So, but I don't know, once those do arrive, eventually we are hoping to run some community bus services as well. So that's Derbyshire Community Transport. As I said, you have to be registered, but it is a simple process. So one time registration with no fee. I know some CTs do have fees for registration, and that's time limited, but we don't. We also, community organisations can also register with us because they're able to hire vehicles through us as well. So it's not just an individual, but if the local scout group wants to borrow a bus, we'll talk about that in a bit, then they can do that as well. They can borrow a bus from us, but I don't know, Denby Pottery, which is just down the road from where we're based in Ripley, they wouldn't be able to hire a bus from us. What we then have is a trading company, which is a registered limited company, just like any other commercial company, and it's wholly owned by the charity. It's through this mechanism that we are able now to hold an operating license, and we've got 10 discs, 5 in each of Ripley and in Chesterfield. We then have a resource sharing agreement between the two. So the resources at the moment are owned by the charity, and they're then made available, they're then hired out to the trading company to run the services and to and that's with the objective of making a profit. So we run separate accounts, we have separate board meetings, it's a separate board, but there is quite a lot of overlap. In fact, we're missing a member, and we're looking for trustees and board members at the moment, so it's not quite as it should be, but we've got some adverts out. So if anybody would like to join either the board of Derbyshire Community Transport as the trust or the board meeting of the trading company, I'd be very interested to hear from you. That's just a little plug in there. So that resource sharing agreement, it's taken us some time to make sure that we've got that right. We've taken advice, legal advice, advice from the Community Transport Association, and other CTs that also have this model, and it's much more, it's becoming a more common model for charities who want to have the operating license and the flexibility of that. So the objective being is that we make money in the charity, in the trading company, so that we can tip that back into the charity. But we do need to account for hours, and it's a bit of a pain, but there we are, that's the way to do it. And it's through this mechanism that we are able to run our local bus services. So although we use Derbyshire Community Transport, DCT, as the trading name, it's actually Derbyshire Community Transport Trading Limited that has the license and runs those services. So our gentlemen, just to talk a little about our volunteers and our staff. Now we have, most of our staff are part-time and they're paid. We just have 6 managers and supervisors. That's new. It was 5 up to a couple of months ago. And as you can see, we have drivers and passenger assistants. Now, passenger assistants travel with individuals or groups who will find it difficult to do, that will find the journey difficult for a number of reasons. Those may be anxiety related, they may be a safety related, there may be, in case they, I don't know, they have an epileptic fit, so they need to have somebody that's on board. They may need somebody that can administer oxygen. Or it may be just that there's a group of people who might get excited and they need somebody who will be able to keep them engaged and so that they enjoy the journey, so that they're comfortable with the journey. And we actually see that the role of the driver is to deal with what happens on the outside, but the passenger assistant is managing the whole environment sort of behind the driver's seat. And it can be quite an exhausting and complex job. If the you imagine that you've got people who have anxiety related issues, or they've got they could be particularly boisterous, and then the vehicle breaks down, then it'll be the passenger assistant who deals with the people while the driver deals with getting the show back on the road. Vast majority of our staff are part-time. I think there are 6, and they're not all the managers and supervisors that are full-time. So most of our staff work split shifts, the drivers and the passenger assistants, so they live very close, and they're doing 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon on contract work. And then we have the middle of the day and in the evenings and at the weekends where we can do some of our other work and meet the needs of our local community. And one of the things that I guess I've brought there, and I think is extremely important, is to maximise the number of hours that the buses are out. Something I learned from Megabus, where really you just need to keep the wheels turning all the time, and the more hours you can do that, then the more viable everything is going to be, and you've reduced the cost. Also, most of our staff, but not all, are towards the end of their career, shall we say. So we have people who perhaps were bored when they're retired and they're bored, or getting a pension, or people that want to give back. So we've got, it's mainly that the sort of the older age group, and they do it for reasons other than the money. Although money, of course, they like having that. It is a very, very, very sociable place, and I've noticed that. I know people say that about bus companies, but they, because the objectives are slightly different, it does impact how people are at work. We do have a small number of volunteers. There were a lot more volunteers, say in 2019, 2018, I think it was. But by the time I joined, that number had dwindled. It was say a couple of dozen, and we had a few came back after the pandemic. And I believe that that's something that's happening with volunteering throughout the country. And it's a challenge to generate sufficient volunteers. And obviously there are issues around training and so on that go with that. This is just a quick explanation of our structure. The posts in green are project funded and not part of the day-to-day what we do day-to-day. And the transport manager to the left, that's a very new post. So I am the legal transport manager, and at the moment there's a general manager who reports to me, and she is also the transport manager for the operating license. And we've now created a focused role of transport manager who will deal just with those compliance and own license issues. Obviously I'll be very much involved with that as well. And then you've got the two locally controlled depots. I know it says operations manager. That's actually based in Chesterfield, because we outsource our maintenance, and so that role also has had historically a responsibility to work with our maintenance provider. We actually share a site with them. You might say you're not spending much time looking at finance. We actually outsource our finance and our payroll. We did do it in-house up to sort of 2020, but it takes up so much. It's much more cost effective for us to have it out of house, and we can have the expertise that we need within that. One of the challenges in a small organisation is knowing the right answers and having the expertise involved. So we've chosen to outsource quite a few things there. On that, we're also part of the trade association, Community Transport Association, and I'm actually one of the trustees of that, but that's an important place where we can get information and advice. So that's our structure. And then there are, just to mention, the sort of specific training. So if you've been driving, if you obtained your driving license before 1997, you will automatically have a D1 on your license up to the age of 70. But that's a D1 restricted, D1 101. But that does entitle you to drive on a Section 19 license, Section 19 permit, sorry. So the majority of our drivers, well, all of those who drive exclusively for the charity are driving on that basis. We do have a growing number who got PCVs and D1 unrestricted, and we are indeed training more people to have the D1 non-restricted license, because that gives us more flexibility. But whatever they have, they all do a Midas minibus driver awareness scheme training. We have 3 trainers in-house to are able to do that. And then there is the companion qualification or training for passenger assistance, which PATS, which we also do. We then, as I mentioned, we do have passengers who have specific needs, and so our drivers receive that, the passenger assistants, or possibly the drivers, will receive additional training to deal with those individual passengers. So we need to make sure that we can match that up together. And then we do other sort of standard induction. And the other thing we do is safeguarding training. And I think this is, again, something that recognises the different position that our community transport drivers have, or staff have, in relation to their service users. So we are expected to be part of the overall safeguarding network and to report in any issues or concerns that we identify. And that is an important part of what we do. And there'll rarely be a week goes by without us needing to make some report or other. Given the vulnerable groups of people we deal with, that's not necessarily surprising, I guess, but it's not something I experienced working in the bus industry, certainly. So our buses, we've got 31 now, our vehicles. 4 are larger than 17 seats. And then we've got the accessible minibuses. Those are vehicles up to 17 seats. So to drive on a D1, it's 17 seats, including the driver. And that's a way that CTs tend to talk about buses for some reason. And then we've got 2 non-accessible minibuses that we use on journeys that are for SEND schools. We do some work for Derby School for the Deaf, but they don't need the accessibility requirements. They don't have the accessibility requirements. They've got a few pictures. So these were taken by Tony in our depot. You can see we've got mainly Mercedes, but just because it's a Mercedes they are very much not all the same. There's no significance in the red for the Peugeot, other than that was what was available. In fact, we've by chance ended up with 2 red Peugeots, the only 2 red vehicles we have in the fleet. And this was taken at our Ripley depot, which is now quite snug, I think is a way to describe it. So this is the fleet we have in Ripley. There's 6 sprinters. I see there's a question in the chat. Should I leave that to the end? I think I was going to leave it to the end.
Yes, okay, Liz.
Yep. Okay, so we've got our standard sprinters, but as you can see, so they're different with destination boards or with not. We have 2 PSV class 6 sprinters, so we maintain all our vehicles as though they were maintained on operating license, so with an 8-week inspection cycle, and all of that is just the same. I find that very difficult not to do it that way, because how can you say that, oh, well, you're on a permit, then you don't need to have such and such. The one thing that is different is that we have a certain number of vehicles that have the PSV, the category 6 MOT, and we have a smaller number of those that have that. When I did this, you can see there were 2 of the sprinters and 2 mellow-bodied sprinters, mellow-bodied Mercedes that had PSV. We are about, or perhaps this week, another one of the sprinters will go through the PSV MOT, so that we'll be able to use that on the operating license work. A smaller Citroën Dispatch, the 2 Ford Transits, and then the 2 Boxers. So, as I said, they might all be Mercedes, but if you look at the vehicle to the left and the 2 to the right, you can see Mercedes are very different and they have very different needs. So the little Peugeot is great for going down the roads in Derby City, where we do the SEND work. And you see the vehicle to the left, which is again 17 seats, has got the destination board. It runs on the Ripley Town Service 147, and has been since the beginning of 3rd of October. Again, some pictures of the vehicles parked in our yard. You can see more of the mellow-bodied, which are the big square ones, versus the smaller van-shaped Mercedes. Now, I have to say, none of our vehicles are terribly new, but they are a lot newer than they were when I arrived. We're finally getting rid of the last 18-year-old one, but I'm just waiting for it to be towed away. It's been off the road for a little while. and that has been a real challenge for us to get our vehicles reduce the age, fleet age, which is now the average age is 11. If you exclude our coach, which I'll come on to in a minute. But it's a real challenge for us to get the age group, improve the age. So last year we actually, we bought 8 vehicles. So out of a fleet of 31, you can imagine just those were the 8 that we needed to replace the most. Chesterfield fleet is more varied. So we've got a Marco Polo coach on a man chassis, 1 solo, which is our newest acquisition, and then 1 transit that is accessible. All of the vehicles in Chesterfield are accessible. We've got the Mellor-bodied, some PSV and some not, and then the Mercedes Sprinters. And then we've got a very I've called them large bus. One is a 32-seat coach and one is a 21-seat, like a large minibus. And then 2 other Varios that actually the drivers like. They're definitely on my list of disposing, but the drivers really like them. They're those type of vehicles that just carry on going forever. So that's Chesterfield fleet. Sorry, this fleet picture of the coach is not so brilliant. It's an 08 plate, Marco Polo, silver. We bought it from a company in Pontefract, and they'd had it from new. And what they'd done, what was special about this, so it is PSVAR compliant. And what they'd done is they procured this so that you could, this is the interior, so that you could remove the seats behind, all the seats behind where the wheelchair lift came up. They are all removable. So you can actually get 6 wheelchairs in, and we thought that would be useful where you have a group that don't want to separate out the wheelchairs. So up to now, if we had a group that were going sort of 16 people and a couple in a wheelchair, we would actually have to run 2 vehicles and the wheelchairs go and run separately, which is not great. This allows us to carry larger numbers of people and in a sort of fully mixed environment. It's actually, we procured it last August to run on a schools contract, which we have for a local St Mary's school in Chesterfield. We have 2 vehicles that run on that. We have a regular driver. The children love it. They complain when it's not on the road for any reason. This is our newest purchase. You can see it runs on the 148. We've bought it from CT4, so it's an Optare Solo. These pictures, which are courtesy of David Basford, I think, he were taken before we'd bought it. We had it on loan for a couple of weeks, and it's now with us on a sort of, well, we bought it. So we've removed the decals. We're just going to decide what to do. I think it'll probably get route branded so that it doesn't look so much like a bus that we've just bought from anywhere. Our contract for the 148 is 3 years +1 +1. We were originally running it with the step entranced vehicle, and that was in theory sufficient for the number of passengers, but it is a more popular route, and just the getting out and assisting the wheelchair users into the buses was slowing it down quite a lot. And we had reports that occasionally there were certain routes where it may get busier. We haven't experienced that, but there was some concern about that. So hence the purchase of this. For its age, it is a really tidy bus. I was pleased with that. It's different from going out and buying, oh, well, we need however many, we're going to spend £1 million on this. Every penny really, really matters, and you have to make sure that you make lots of good decisions. This is as I said, it's a Vario, but it's 32-seater. It's actually on permanent loan, free loan from the local authority. And I think it looks better on the inside than the out. All of the seats are removable, so you can just have wheelchairs in there, and there's a wheelchair lift at the back. That means that, again, you can get slightly larger numbers of wheelchairs, or wheelchairs with for people with specialist requirements. You know, if they don't fit in a standard reference size wheelchair, which I know a lot of wheelchairs aren't, then this bus is useful for that. But as 32, it's just about a school trip, or a small school trip, so it does get used quite a lot. And this, in conjunction with our 21-seater, what we use is when the coach is off the road, so that's our sort of fallback position. As I said, the Mercedes Sprinter and the van shaped are the stalwarts of our fleet. The one to the right came from East Riding, and was set up as a PSV, so with a destination blind. One from the left is rebranding of one that we had for some time ago, in depth fact, I think it was in the Amber Valley livery. Then the mellow-bodied medium buses, I've shown you a couple of pictures of those. They are square boxes on wheels, but they are very, very useful, and service users like them because you've just got a bit more room than you can see in one of those, sort of on the inside, whereas these are sort of bigger and boxier, and you've got a bit more space. Particularly useful for shopping buses, these ones, and you know, again, that's or people who have specific needs with their wheelchairs. We have a couple of these. They're both on lease, and they're fine, but they just were. Yeah, so we have 3 of these. 2 are non-accessible and 1 is accessible. The accessible one is the one on the left, and that was funded through grant funding. I'm actually not quite sure where from, but that was funded. These are the 2 Peugeot boxes. They are, it's just coincidence that we happen to have 2 red ones, and as you can see, we played around with the logos, bought at different times from different places, but it's quite nice that they're red, and I rather like that colour. I'd have more like that if we could. Then this is the baby of the fleet, which is going to be going out to the fleet fairly shortly. It has limited use because of its size, and it may go into one of the initiatives I'll talk about later on. So those are the buses. This is what we do with them. Adult social care, so explain special educational needs. Then group outings, either organised by the group or we organise. So we do regular day trips, we do lunch clubs, and we do a lot of cross-selling in our between people who perhaps use our shopping services and Derbyshire Connect. And you know, that's a really, really important thing. And we're doing some calculations about the social value of these. They're trying to estimate the cost of the social impact, because we think that's important if we want to explain what it is we do. I've just got a few slides on the vehicle features, some of which are obvious, like our vehicles have doors. It's not actually a very good picture of a wide door, and we do have to use the vehicles that we've got. This was this must be 20. So this was one of the ones that was funded through a grant, and it's not as wide as I might like, but here we are. All the vehicles have steps, but then that's nothing sort of particularly special. We can then carry wheelchairs, so all of our ramps are at least 350 kilograms. We've got 450 some that take 450 kilograms. So if you've got a larger person in an electric wheelchair, you can easily get up to that sort of weight. Oh, and there you can see the lift in action. This was actually taken during a trip just after the COVID lockdown, and so everybody's wearing masks, but you can see how that works. there. It's a really important feature, but if you're doing local bus, a lift right, that can just slow the whole process right down. As I said, all of our seats are removable, and you can see that the seats have tracking. They can all be taken out. It's a relatively quick process, and one of the things that the drivers need to do each morning in their drivers walk around check is actually make sure that all the seats are fitted properly, because it'd be possible not to have them fitted properly. So they have to have a good old shake of the seats to make sure that they're in right. And they're all trained to put them in, and that's part of the Midas training that they do. But you can see the tracking goes right the way up. All the seats can come out if we wanted them to. Now that's a bundle of clumps. I didn't have a great picture of these, so ideally they should be a little bit more separated out. But we have a variety of clamps that fit in the tracks, and onto various wheelchairs. And there are several. I didn't go into the huge detail of those, but we do have quite a few different types for different types of wheelchairs and different fitments. And the other thing we have that you don't have at a bus depot is a seat store. So this was just taken on a random day. You can see some of our vehicles have almost all the seats out, and some have very few seats out. Almost all our vehicles will typically have a few seats out. They always go back in before when the vehicle goes for its MOT, so that they can all be checked. But getting the seats in and out, of the right location on the vehicle is a really an important thing, and you always spend lots of time organising the seats and making sure they go back in the right places and people know where the seats are to be. So that was just a whole new area that you don't deal with local bus. Now I've got a few slides on Derbyshire Connect. This is a DRT service. So in 2017, Derbyshire said that they were going to provide a service to each of the districts once a week to go to a local shopping centre, either supermarket or shopping centre. And that was for people who couldn't otherwise travel to the shops or to make those contacts. And it replaced a similar service, but that the transport, the dial-a-ride services have been taking place for 20 years. And so everybody needs to register and book in advance to travel. But then we provide those services in half the county, and Ashbourne Community Transport provide the services in the other half of the county. So the thing about it is you don't need to change your vehicle. It is a genuine door-to-door. You can see there's our driver taking the shopping in for a lady. I've had to stop them going in and turning the fire and putting the kettle on, but because that's not what the job is. As I've explained, the vehicles can accommodate passengers with several wheelchairs. It really is a community on a small bus, and it's a lifeline for some of the isolated individuals. So it's become a social occasion and not just a bus ride. It's funded through Derbyshire County, not from their local transport budget, but from the social care budget. And we weren't sure how secure this was, so we made a little film. So I was going to, if time allows, just going to show you the film now. Hopefully this will work.
Hi, is that Christy? Hi, yes, it's Julie from Derbyshire Community Transport. Hiya, hi. I was just ringing. We haven't seen you for a while. We were just wondering if we're okay and everything's, if you need any shopping.
Yeah, we'll give them a call just to make sure they're all right. Yeah, most of them travels every week, so if there's no answer, it sets off alarm bells, and we give them a call to make sure they're okay, because you never know.
We like it when we go around different places. You know, when we drop people off that don't live close to us, you see different aspects of Ilkeston that you wouldn't probably see.
It's nice because you can hear them in the back and you listen to them talking and laughing and just be in good company for each other. For some, it's the only time they get out all week.
I lost my husband very recently, and it made such a lot of difference to me. You know, to help me get over it.
Yes, it carries the bags in, and that's a bonus.
It's so nice meeting different people and also friendly. And so they changed my life. Oh, it's very convenient. The bus driver's wonderful.
We take the shopping to the door and carry it to the door for them. It's no problem. It's all part of the service. See you next week.
Yeah.
It's a great feeling to know how much they value the service.
Good morning, party people. Just doing a quick video. I'm going to get a YouTube channel and do a video diary on this, but yeah.
Hello? All right. Okay, I don't know what that was. So that was just a short film. We cut it a number of ways. We showed it to the council officers and the councillors, and I think we raised awareness of it. And as a result, well, not just because of that, but the service has now continued, and we were really concerned that we were going to end up that these individuals would be without anywhere to go, any way of going to the local shops. And it's that sort of thing which keeps people independent and living in their own homes. So we also do services for community groups I've mentioned before, and they're able to hire a minibus through us or hire a minibus with a driver. And more often that's with a driver, because there are fewer people who have got the D1 license, and all our vehicles are D1 weight. They're not the weight that you can drive on a B license. I don't know, I thought I'd just talk briefly about a few new initiatives that we've got going on. You know, you can't just stand still, you have to be doing new things. So the first is the local contracts that we did. I think I've spelt contracts wrong there. Derbyshire County Council let contracts to start in October 22. There were actually about 60 that they let. And we bid in for a number, and we were fortunate to win 4 of those contracts. And those are the 4 that we've won, which is 78 Chesterfield to Staveley. That route is there largely because it serves the some of the small roads around Middlecroft Estate and into Staveley and Hartington. And that runs on an hourly basis, and it's an interpeak, so it's done in between our adult social care contracts. Belper to Ripley, which at the moment is a one return trip a day. It used to run more frequently, I think 3 or 5 times a day pre-COVID, and it's been cut down as a result of COVID. Then the Ripley 147, which is from Ripley Sainsbury's to Street Lane. Street Lane, for those that aren't familiar, is a village just to the south of Ripley. Well, it's a street, but it's got its own school, and it's very cut off if that service isn't there. And that again runs just 3 times a day. And then the hourly 148, which is Cottonwood to Alfreton. So the first 3 are on 1-year contracts, and the last one is on a 3+1+1, and is the one we bought the solo for. So these are our first local bus routes so we've got to have ticket machines and all the PSV regs and so on apply to those. We're fortunate that in some of our staff have worked on PSV routes in their past, so that's helped with the introduction. And it is a big step for us. And we've done that really, we concentrated on the small local routes that would be difficult for a larger, that could be difficult for a larger bus to do work on. We're also aware that the council, while they let all these contracts exactly as they were, for some of them, the 1 year ones, and they will be reviewing how they operate, and they could turn into DRT services. We thought we'd like to understand more about the passenger journeys for those people, and perhaps work with the council. Indeed, we are beginning to work with the council as to how we could develop a future for those services, particularly the ones in Ripley at the moment. But we'll look at Chesterfield, no doubt, in due course, see how we could develop a future for something that serves the needs of these local areas. We're also very aware, because we see people in a number of different guises, so they might be doing a day trip, they might be on a shopper trip, that perhaps these different journeys could be knitted together. And we think we're uniquely placed to be able to do that. One, because we have that very local knowledge, and we're able to examine it in that sort of forensic detail, and also because we are providing those other trips that people do. So this is the type of service bus that we use for that. As I said, it's a 17-seater, so as such, it doesn't need to be PSVAR compliant. Actually, we carry very few people on this service, and they are very grateful that the service still runs. I think they thought that it was no longer going to exist, but all the buses do have lifts at the back, and so we can take on people with wheelchairs and so on. And we haven't found on this service that it has caused a negative impact to running time. I've been around I travel on them so often to see how that's going, and obviously we can record that through the ticket machines, and that's really because of the volume of the people that are travelling. So, but it's a vehicle that's also working on adult social care contracts at another time, and so by knitting services together, we're able to help the council, we believe, get more bang for their bucks, more trips. So that was the first initiative for us. We are looking at other services as well, that we may be able to offer. Ideally, we'd be wanting to look at Section 22 permits, but we've got some proposals in at the moment in Derby City for areas where trips have been withdrawn, and we understand that there's going to be a decision made on those tomorrow. And just on the Ripley services, we have already proposed some alterations. One has been agreed with the council, and the other we're waiting an answer very shortly, because we believe it will better serve the needs of the locals, and it's something that we can do with a smaller bus. So we're looking very much for a niche that it's difficult for a large bus to serve. The next initiative, which is very much part of the charity, is tackling loneliness. So it's a Department for Transport scheme, and they were looking to gain evidence about the impact of transport on loneliness. And so they identified the specific groups, as you might expect: elderly, disabled, young, BME groups, and LGBTQ plus community. And they wanted to fund a number of pilots, and they were looking to fund up to £500,000 per pilot. It all has to be spent by March 23. So the findings are going to contribute to the government's tackling loneliness strategy. So although it is a transport fund, it's actually recognising, and I think what's interesting about this is it's recognising that transport, it can be a key driver in loneliness. The person who's managing the project on this is saying they're looking to see what the traditional way of dealing with loneliness has been befriending schemes, but they're actually wanting to see as if there's other ways, better ways of spending, directing funds and private strategy, and the impact that can have on individuals' loneliness, and then therefore their overall health and well-being, and hence where you get to looking at being able to monetize or getting a financial value for the impact of community transport. Now, DCT bid, and we were unsuccessful through the DFT. It would have been a massive thing if we'd won. I can say this now, in a way, it was quite relieved that we didn't. All the money went to umbrella organisations, so there weren't any, I think there was one, but basically no local community transports like ourselves. But one of the people who did win was the Community Transport Association, and they had a successful bid. There were only 10. So they sought to get a number of, to split the funding down into a series of smaller values, and to allow, in order to test a number of different initiatives, and smaller amounts, so that you can get more, a greater variety of information. So they received 102 bids. There were 48 detailed bids, and 17 were granted funding, and the maximum grant that they were going to give was 35,000, and we received 34,000 for tackling loneliness in Chesterfield and North East Derbyshire. And that was based on joint working with the Volunteer Bureau, where they run a befriending scheme, but they have a long waiting list of people who they can't befriend. So we thought it would be useful or interesting to see how those people reacted, and we're partway through that. There's an evaluation process that we are participating in of the government, and we'll be able to see through that, I hope, if there's an impact on individuals. So because these people, we were very keen, because it was a short notice, we wanted to have people where it was already identified and had self-identified as lonely or suffering from social isolation. And so we're working with the charities and their clients for transport to and from events and activities. So one of the groups we're working with are refugee and Ukrainian refugees and other refugees sort of together. And some of those, they never go out of their hostels, apart from when they go on a trip with us. So it really is sort of having a massive impact. People who otherwise will feel that it's a difficult country to negotiate. We've also been able through this to start working with multi-ethnic or the Asia Association, Afro-Caribbean Association, Chinese elders groups, which have been really important. The next project, and again, you know, we're about transport, we're not about buses. I think that's, I don't know if that's sacrilege, but that's what we are, is the car scheme. So we've, I just got to put pen to paper to sign, but we will receive £150,000 over 18 months to trial a car scheme. So this is, we're going to have 2 vehicles, one of which is diesel wheelchair accessible vehicle, or WAV, and we would have liked both our vehicles to be electric, but they just weren't suitable ones available. The lead time was such, it was going to be unfeasible. And one electric car. Hello. We'll be then having there's going to be a 12-month pilot running on this, and we've chosen Belper to run through because we've done some previous research there and identified the need for people with disabilities to get around. I don't know, you probably don't know Belper, but it is quite a hilly place, and there's a relatively organised disabled forum there that we've been able to plug into, if that's, excuse the pun. And then there are 2 parts of it. One is it's a voluntary car scheme, so volunteer drivers, rather than using their own vehicles, can use one of our vehicles. And then it's also a car club. So if the individual has a disabled relative, perhaps they want to take out, but they can't in their own car, then they'll be able to borrow our car for, hire it for, a few hours or whatever, and then take the individual out. It's funded through Motability, and they're piloting it because they were interested in smaller areas, this type of scheme in a smaller area rather than a big city, and also to see whether or not there's something that could become sustainable or semi-sustainable out of this. project will be starting in December. We should have the vehicles in February. We're then looking at a research project. This is funded through, again, we hope this will be funded through Motability. It's not quite signed on the dotted line, but one of the disadvantages in community transport is the booking process is quite laborious. Typically, you have to phone up. And while there are apps for DRTs, many of these are not designed specifically with people with disabilities in mind. So it might not be possible actually to use the app, or you might not be able to put down the information about what your needs are. So it's always struck me that it's quite difficult, although it's a one-time registration process, you still have to tell a relative stranger why you need to travel in a wheelchair and why you have to book, you know, what your needs are. And it just strikes me that that is not a great way. I believe that as a booking process, it's self-selecting, and therefore there will be people who perhaps don't want or are unable to make those telephone calls, and then that becomes a barrier in itself to booking community transport and therefore using community transport. We're working on refining the scope of that piece of research. We hope that we're aware that nobody's done that type of research and looked at that in the past, so we're hoping this will become it sounds very grand to say a standard reference, but it will be a new piece of work that hasn't existed, and I hope it'll inform the development of future ways in which booking systems and booking can be developed. Because at the middle, in the centre, we are still taking bookings from information from passengers, and we're matching that with vehicles. Other initiatives, carbon reduction measures. We've recently carried out a review of potential carbon reduction measures. We're looking at a depot move in Ripley, and it's associated with that, and we should be putting a planning application. We've begun the consultation process, which will finish the end of this month, and immediately after that we will put in the planning application. Then I've got to go and find the money for it. We're working with, as I said, with Derbyshire County Council to look at the BSIP funded DRT proposals for Amber Valley. We are looking at Section 22 routes in Derby City, or we may have to run them slightly differently in the short term until we get the permits. And this is, again, as I said, to replace services in areas where service has been lost. And we're also researching the opening of an outstation in Derby City. There isn't a community transport provision in Derby City, and we in Ripley, although we're sort of 8 miles down the road or a bit less than that, we get a lot of requests for community transport, and because we have to do that, all that dead mileage, everything becomes more expensive. And we're looking at, perhaps having identified the needs, we're looking at ways in which we can actually set up something locally. We would want it to be not just we sit in Ripley and we think, oh, that's a good idea, we'll have that there, but we'd like the local to be engaged with that, and so it really meets the needs of the local communities rather than what we think they need. So those are some of the other initiatives. We've got other things going on as well, which I could tell you about. Just to say that photos were some of the different photos were from Dave Basford, and he runs his own blog, and Tony Wilson, who was a former driver with us, whose daughter now works with us, and indeed was the lady who was answering the telephone at the beginning of the film. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. That was absolutely fascinating to hear what areas you're either in or about to go in. Really, really good stuff. I'm sure that's brought about a number of queries on the part of our listeners. So without more ado, we'll go on to the question session. Can I ask you to raise your hands electronically? And you do that by going to the reactions bar. And I think it says raise hand, doesn't it? That's right, raise hand. So could you do it that way, please, and get your questions ready. Looking forward to seeing some. Anthony D, come on.
Yes, thank you very much. That was a fascinating presentation. In your Derbyshire Connect, how does it actually work? Do people, if people want to go shopping, can they go anywhere? How do you organise the trips so that people, you actually join the trips together? Who does that? Do you have to ring up? Have you got one
Right,
of these?
yeah, so it's registered as a local bus, flexibly registered service. It's a many to one registration. So the one terminus point on the way in and from one origin on the way out. The county has been divided into areas, and those are designed for, well, if you could pick up, expecting that you could pick up about 12 people in that area. So the individuals have to book in advance. We then, obviously people tend to book the same time, they book every week, but we go through the process of reviewing who's booked, what the optimum route is, and then we tell them what time we're going to be arriving. And as a flexibly registered service, the punctuality window is 10 minutes. So if we've said we'll be with you at 10, then we have to be with you between 10 to and 10 past in order to pick you up. In practice, it's likely to be the same time, and you heard the same, same time next week. That's because actually it's probably going to be the same people, but if there's anything different from that, then we'll phone you up the day before and tell you. So does that answer the question?
Yes, I was only thinking about all these wonderful apps and whatever, and all the problems that people who haven't got access to an app do. So it's all, you do it all by telephone.
We do it all by telephone and local knowledge. Yes, there are already wonderful apps, but as I was saying, they're not user friendly if you're 95 and you haven't got a phone, but you still want to go to the shops. And I think that it's a bit of my hobby horse, is that then it needs to be an inclusive booking system. We need to recognise that there are people for whom using a telephone like that is an anathema, and there's people for whom using an app would be impossible, and they all ought to be able to get together. And at the moment, that's not really happening.
Yeah. Thanks, Anthony. John Carr, good evening. Unmute, please.
Evening, Jeff.
Good to see you.
Sorry, I came in somewhat late, but very interested that you've obviously got a close working relationship with Derby County Council, or Derbyshire County Council. It was, of course, in Derbyshire that the problems arose when the taxi operators challenged letting of council contracts to community transport organisations on the basis that they viewed it as state aid, because CT operators got a certain amount of support from the council, whether it's by capital grant or by revenue funding, really didn't make too much difference. How has that relationship changed now, and how confident are you that another war won't break out?
Right. In relation to that piece of history, which happened a little bit before I started, there was a tapering. So there was a grant that was made, and it was revenue, I believe, annually. Different CTs use that funding in different ways. The one that I'm now working in tended to spend it on putting on the dialer ride services. There was then, once the decision was made, there was a tapering amount of support, and that finished in 2017. I think it was 2017, which was when the Derbyshire Connect service happened. So that was then a local bus service, so anybody could bid for it, but it was won actually by 2 community transport services. So however, we were also at the time, the CT40C was operating out of a Derbyshire County Council owned depot with a peppercorn rent, and so had to move out of there as well. So our we now don't receive any special, we don't get any special concessions from Derbyshire County Council that wouldn't be open to anybody else. We do work on a Section 19 permit base as opposed to an operating license or a hackney carriage, but then we're not allowed to make a profit. So I guess the two things sort of, but one balances out the other. There are some local authorities who've decided that they wouldn't let contracts for adult social care and those types of things on anything other than a commercial basis. Derbyshire has taken the decision it doesn't have to do that, so it will only do that. It doesn't need to do that. They decided definitely that they weren't going to let the Derbyshire Connect service on a Section 22 permit. And that's why there's none of those operations in Derbyshire at the moment. But we have been talking to them about the feasibility of introducing some, but on the strict understanding is they can only ever operate if there isn't a commercial or a subsidised service that could operate with it, in that area. So we're trying to be very, very careful about that now. Well, we did have our own little challenges because it was quite difficult time when I first arrived, and we were in a financially difficult position, and the council were understanding and recognised that we were trying to do the right thing to create something that was sustainable. But I'm not aware that there are any specific challenges for us as a charity and doing the adult social care. And of course, for the operating license, we're just a company like anybody else.
Thank you.
Okay, John, thank you. Jim, come on in.
Thank you. That's very interesting, Liz, particularly as I live down the road in Derby City.
Ah, right. Okay.
So a general question and a specific one. The general one is there is already a door-to-door services operating in Derby, although I'm not quite sure what the ownership of them is these days. I hope you're not going to be treading on too many toes if you come into the city. And the other one is one of the other things I do apart from being involved with the OS is to help to run a group which includes people in wheelchairs. So if we want a day out next summer, can I just ring you up and ask for a quote and with a mixture of able-bodied and wheelchairs?
Well, the answer to the second question first is yes, absolutely. Love to receive that.
Thought you'd say that.
We are trying to assess the need, and it would be very interesting to have another conversation about that, because we would only want to come into Derby if there was a genuine need. In respect of door-to-door, there was a Derby City Community Transport that then was merged or bought or something, I'm not sure how, became part of Notts and Derby.
Yeah, I think that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, that although the vehicles are still in Derby, it is not actually operating. I've spoken to the MD there and also to Derby City, because obviously we wouldn't want to step on any toes. We'd want to be supportive if we could be. Indeed, we'd be suggesting that they phone them up if they were still doing that, but they don't do that. There may be one or two individual journeys, but they don't offer that as a sort of structured service. Not anymore, no. So that was partly why we think that we get the calls, and then we also thought, yes, what's happening? So we have done that piece of research.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Steve Sellers, please.
Thank you. Thanks. A most interesting presentation about an area that many of us don't have a great deal of knowledge about through our day-to-day lives. So most interesting. Thank you. I suppose related to that, it was, what do you see your opportunities are for expanding into the local bus service market beyond what you're doing just now? And how are you finding the staffing situation at the moment? Because a lot of companies are very much struggling to find numbers of staff that they need to run what they need to run.
Right. Well, we've inevitably you need to be a little bit opportunistic, but it needs to fit in with where our for the local bus services. We certainly don't see ourselves as taking on any mainline services. We see us as filling in the very local stuff that are it might be difficult for bigger bus operators to continue to do. So we see that there's this sort of niche, those things that were viable that are no longer viable, and let's face it, councils don't have so much money to spend, so there'll be this cascade. So there'll be the stuff that was commercial stays commercial, that's great. There'll be the stuff that was commercial that falls into the tender network, and it's absolutely right that gets supported, but that will inevitably push out some stuff that sits that just gets abandoned basically, and that's where we see that we fit in. So to create the whole offer, we are of all the bus services of BSIPs in the country, my understanding is Derbyshire is the only one that has CTs sitting on the board, Enhanced Partnership Board. So I sit on that, and I think we've got quite a good understanding throughout that there's a whole continuum, and you've got to do this little local stuff that if you've got the big, run buses, if you've got the big main lines and people travel on the main lines, and then the complaints that will sit in the MP's bag for all those journeys that people can't do, and whatever you do with that, you're never going to, because buses are mass transit and we're not. So it's finding those. Now that's quite, 1 or 2 passengers is not enough for a big bus, but you put that together with a few other people, you're fairly rapidly getting to something that's more sustainable and providing a service that, and we'd been talking about sort of ticketing that can go through and so on. And the other question, drivers. I am touching wood, I am crossing the fingers. Just at the minute, it's, I think, because we have the variety of services that we offer. So because we can do the D1 non-restricted, and people who perhaps want to have a bit of extra money, those people are coming in. We are training our own people up to D1 unrestricted, so the restricted people into the unrestricted. So we're training them up so they can drive the vehicle or even the large vehicle. So we are doing that, and in the past we probably didn't. But we're also careful to look at the work that we take on and not take on too much. And we have that advantage over a typical operator who had an amount of work and they're now struggling to fill that. And we don't tend to operate on, we do bits but not lots at the weekend and in the evenings, and that helps too.
Yeah, quite. Okay, Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that interesting question. Right, next in the queue is John Hardy. Can you unmute, John, and go ahead?
Hello there. You explained at the beginning of your presentation the history of Derbyshire Community Transport and how it emerged from the constituents of Chesterfield and Amber Valley. And then you gave it the name Derbyshire Community Transport. Does that not give the impression that you are able to operate or want to operate over the whole of the county? And if so, what's the relationship with the other schemes? You mentioned briefly Ashbourne, which I think does pretty much the same sort of activities as your organisation. They work Derbyshire Connect, and I think they have 1 or 2 registered services as well, or they have had in the past. There's Bakewell and Eam Community Transport that I'm aware of, but I don't think they take part in any of those activities. I know a little bit more about those because I do take books, donate books to their bookshop.
The bookshop, yes. The famous bookshop, yes. I'm really envious of their bookshop, yes.
So I just wondered about the relationship with the others, and does Derbyshire Community Transport imply that you've got aspirations to take over all community transport operations in the county under one umbrella?
Well, I'm going to be incredibly diplomatic about it. I inherited the name. It is great. It is a it is a good name. I understand that when it was first registered, which was back in 2018, that there was some disquiet and upset about the name. I think it's fair to say that my predecessor did very much see that we ought to be expanding into all areas, and it was he that set up a depot in Glossop, which is not really in the north and the east of, the eastern side of the county, and was looking to operate, had some aspirations to operate there, and indeed also in Bassetlaw in Nottinghamshire. So what we try and do is, if we get a request for something that's really not us, we will divide, and we do get that because of our name. We will say, we think you ought to be speaking to blah, and we do try and create, have the relations, to develop the relations. Because of that sort of growth agenda, if you like, that of my predecessor, I did have had to spend some time working on that relationship, but there are 2 CTs that are on the BSIP, and that is ourselves and Ashbourne, and so we very much sort of try and fight the CT corner, recognising that we actually have different areas that we serve. And I think within the county, it's sort of within the people in public transport, or it's known which areas we work in, and we just try and point people in the right direction. But I do, I meet up with Bakewell and Eam Community Transport, not so much with Erewash and SWAD, but we do, we communicate from time to time, and we need to feed back what's happening in the enhanced partnership. But while ourselves and Ashbourne have decided that we will set up the trading company with the operating licence, the others don't have operating licenses at the moment, so it does impact on what they're actually able to deliver. Yeah. But when we're talking about booking systems or services during COVID, or getting people to vaccination centres, then we would have a conversation if it was needed, and I borrowed buses from people, they borrowed stuff from us. So yeah.
Okay, John, thank you. It's interesting, isn't it, that? Because it would seem you're almost ready, Liz, to take over any failing CTs around the county. No, I wasn't joking. I hope you are.
Well, I mean, we think that there's a need for CT, and if there are difficulties, we want to be supporting them. So we have had a conversation. We have for a while supported Manor CT in Sheffield. They were struggling to answer the telephones and do the back office stuff. So we just had a telephone line, because we have office open from 8 in the morning till 5 at night. So we just did their calls and stuff for them for a bit.
Sure. Okay.
So we can do that.
Good. Oh, we'll see you in swaddling coat yet then. Well done. Okay, Anthony, do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you very much. It was a question about, do you do any home to school transport for special schools?
Yes, we do.
And obviously that's contractual, is it?
That's contractual, yes. We do. We go to, if you know the area, we go to Portland College, and then we go to School for the Deaf in Derby City, St Giles, and 2 more that I can't remember.
Thank you.
Okay, jolly good. Any more questions there? I can perhaps have one then while I've got the air. Can you give us a sort of rough breakdown of revenues? I take it most of them are from local authority, but what's the split between local authority and the actual punters themselves, and indeed other sources?
Right. So we've just won these contracts, and sorry, I'm going to be so it will be excluding the local authorities, the local bus services we've just won, which is about 250,000. I'm only doing that because I can do the sums easily. When I started, 80% was from Derbyshire County. It's now about 45%, and we get about 15% from Derby City, about 10% from an organisation called Chesterfield Care Group, because we're now running services for them. And then the rest is from local groups and people doing individuals or local groups or regular groups.
Yeah, okay, so that includes the DRT, obviously, that those people are actually paying individually as well.
No, well, most of them are on gold card, but that's included in the half that we're doing for the local authority.
Okay.
We were very, I was concerned when I started that we were overly dependent on the local authority. So we've actively looked to diversify where we get money from, hence looking at Derby City. We're doing more work with the care group. We're doing some work with care homes directly now. So even if they're a contract, they're based on that. And plus we're putting on more of our own services, day trips and lunch clubs, those sort of things.
Okay, good. It strikes me you're ideally placed, aren't you, as an organisation to look at how you actually keep rural transport going, basically, by looking at all the various threads and trying to pull them together. That's the great thing about your organisation, I think.
That is what we think we could do uniquely. So not that we've done this, I hasten to say, but we could run a group of individuals could run a service if they couldn't get to say a big shed, take and do some shift work. That bus could then be picked up and go on adult social care. Then it could be used for a shopper service. You could do the same thing in reverse, and then it might be run by the Scouts in the evening. And that would be my ideal way of looking at it. So, number of different drivers. We have we use an app for our checks, so first use checks and reporting of accidents. So as a transport manager, I have continuous effective control because I know exactly where all the buses are. We also have an app that we use, our drivers use for all the passengers. So again, I can see where that is. We have they pick people up. And so between the two, I know where all the buses are and where have they been checked and what the issues are that are happening with that. And really you need that in order to run in a multi-site and dispersed model.
Sure. Okay, thanks. I noticed John's just come back again. Would you like to come in again, John? Unmute.
There you go. Getting out of practice since COVID went. Derbyshire, I think, in compiling its BSIP, was quite forward-looking, and has got quite a bit in there about EVs, about novel services for tourists and things like that. To control those, it's going to probably have to make a fair amount of use of modern IT. And I have to say, personally, I agree very much with what you were saying. I think many of our passengers nowadays look at the apps that are available, but have no real idea how to use them, no idea how to get an alternative way of getting information about services. So we're almost creating an underclass of would-be public transport passengers, but that's perhaps a side issue. To what extent are you able to interface if Derbyshire County Council, for example, wanted to include your services within a mass type application?
Oh, well, Derbyshire don't have at the moment an IT back office.
Right.
That they own, and we are part of the discussion about anything that they might put in place. My own view, for what it's worth, is that the operators are the better people to run that, because I don't want to have one system I use. Oh, you're a Derbyshire County Council customer, so I've got to do this, and then I've got to have the buses somewhere else, and how do the things link? This might be controversial, I don't know. I think that the current systems, the current commercial systems, are very expensive and don't really deliver in the way that they'd need to, and that makes them too expensive for CTs to use. If they're owned by the local authorities, then the local authorities are subject to changes in funding. They may not see a priority that CT use it once for the development, and they will always inevitably go to look at the large volume. So I mentioned this research project that we are due to be starting, scoping it out. We've got researchers on board, and that is about barriers to use. I said people with disabilities, but actually it's people who aren't comfortable with the, are self-selecting out for whatever reason. And my ambition, and it is only an ambition at this point, but I'm getting the interest of other associations or organisations and funders for this, is that what we need to develop is a CT specific app that is a CT specific system that can cope with, it could be partitioned, so that we can run our bit, Ashbourne can run their bit, Trentbarton can link in if that's the right people, and it might be that you could run something in Cornwall over it, that is designed around people's needs, that's very much takes those into account, and does all the good stuff around scheduling or allocations that needs to take place, but that is much more affordable than the systems that are currently there. And I know that sounds a very grand plan, and getting the research is the first step into that. I have to say that the council, although it's unaffordable for us to pay for the development, for the council it isn't. And we've have identified some sort of proto systems that, I mean, in an ideal world for me, if you don't want to have a separate app, you want to use whatever communications that you normally use in order to feed into a booking system. And we also need to make it so that if you want to book you're in a doctor's surgery and you want to book an appointment, the doctor said, the receptionist says, so it's 10:30 next Tuesday, Mrs. Jones, and do you need transport? Okay, I'll just put that in.
Yeah.
That's how it has to happen.
Yeah.
Yes, I know about mobile phone signal, and this would be something that would sit on the, you can have stuff that would sit on the phone, so you don't have continuous signal. I mean, that's an issue, but you can have that, and I understand that's why you have to have some of the apps approaches anyway. So there's a lot to think about there, and it's not something that will be solved tomorrow because I've also got the day job to run, but we're actively looking at that, and I think it's generally accepted that there's an issue, and if we can manage to knit something together there, then that would be fantastic. We'll see where we get to.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. All we can hope, Liz, is that you're involved in whatever initiative goes on, because it seems to be you've got a grasp of it. Well done.
Well, I'm trying to get, and I'm quite passionate about it. Sorry, I could get on my, I didn't want to talk about this initiative because it's a vision rather than an initiative at the moment.
Oh, it's good. It's great to have a vision. No problem with that. Okay. No other questions at the moment, so I can bring it to a close. It's just right, in fact, in our appointed time. Thanks, Liz, for giving us such a great insight into Derbyshire Community Transport. Not just DCT, it's opened my eyes, certainly, as to the various roles that you either can now carry out or are proposing to carry out. Wonderful. It's obvious, too, to me that the organisation is in good hands, and I think we can look forward to an interesting, or can I say rewarding future? Perhaps that's pushing a little bit for a charity, is it? But you know what I mean. So
relevant.
Oh yeah, I should have looked at that, shouldn't I? Yes, not quite rewarding. Gentlemen, can we give our appreciation to Liz in the usual way, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
You didn't hear a lot of that because it's muted at my request, but everybody was clapping, I can assure you. Thanks, Liz. Many thanks. Can I just do one brief item on the Omnibus Society Midland branch, which is that if you've got your diaries available, the planned dates for the presidential weekend in 2023, and we'll soon be there, 2023, have had to be changed, largely because HM government has requisitioned the hotel that we had booked. So times have overtaken us, and the boat people are obviously far more important than the Omnibus Society. Quite right too. So the dates will be actually October. Let me just check here. Yes, the dates will be October 6 to October 9, 2023. That is, as you'll note, exactly a week later than the presidential weekend was going to be. All the details, the venue, what have you, the prices will be available in due course. But I thought I'd just check that out so that you've got your diaries prepared. Okay, that's about it then. Thank you very much indeed for participating. Thanks once again to Liz on behalf of the OS for giving up her time and answering those questions splendidly, if I might say so. So let's close on that note, a high note. Thanks, Liz. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you
Good night.
very much.
Good night. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.